Welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many of you here today. Really excited to share with you today some strategies and ideas around partnering with families to support the needs of students at Tier 3. I'm Andy Garbitz at the University of Wisconsin. I'm pleased to serve in the role as content facilitator for the session this afternoon. So just before we get started with some of our content for today, I would like to share with you a few preliminary slides that will walk through some expectations and related details for managing the Pathable interface and your time during this virtual session. So you can see on this slide, we have some expectations listed for to really help facilitate that everyone has a positive and productive experience at the forum this year. I'm sure you've seen these before as we're into day 2 of the forum. So you can see that there are some expectations listed, particularly for the chat and the polls. We just ask that you use inclusive and productive language, are sincere and engaged during our time together today. And of course, we'll do our part by actively participating and following these expectations as well. Within the Pathable interface, there are a few points that you might want to orient towards. You've undoubtedly found your way to the agenda in Pathable since you're all here. If you do have questions as you move forward and want to navigate to other sessions, you can go to the drop-down menu at the top and select My Agenda. Then you will note that all of the sessions that you've marked for your time during the forum will appear. As you navigate this our specific session page within Pathable, you'll see a few things immediately. You'll see some session details, our names, the title, the date and time, etc. You'll also see a link to join the session. So if you do accidentally navigate away from the session page and then find yourself back here, you can just navigate back to this same page, click that join meeting link, and that will take you back to this place. Within Pathable, you'll also notice some opportunities to interact through a chat in polls. You'll be able to see other individuals who are in this session with us, and then you'll notice some files. Each of those different tabs will be activated when you click on them. And we will be using the poll feature as we proceed during our time together today. So you will want to orient that so you can participate in the polls and chat functions. The chat is primarily for engaging with other participants around the session content. This is a great place for you to ask questions that you might have of us that you would like to ask. You can find the Q&A function under polls as well. And if you enter a question or a comment in that space, that will come directly to our presenters today. You'll also notice that we have some polls, as I mentioned, and you'll complete those when we prompt during our session today. If you do accidentally navigate away from our session within Pathable, you can immediately join back into the session by clicking that My Agenda tab and navigating to this session, which should be marked again for your attendance during the forum today. And so you can see a couple examples here of what navigating away might look like, but that would then immediately take you away from our session page to another place, such as social media within Pathable, which is a great way for connecting with others, but not as helpful if you want to engage in this session. But you can find your way back here just by following these instructions. If you are having a challenging time navigating back to the session, or you have any questions about your participation during the session today, you can click that Help Desk tab at the top of the Pathable menu bar, and somebody will be available to assist you. Here are a few guiding questions that you may have been thinking about already during your forum experience. As you consider your time and participation during this session, these questions may be helpful to you in guiding some key takeaway points, some ways to make the content particularly relevant for your team or your school, your district, or your community. So these are some thoughts to keep in mind as you progress during our time together today. As I mentioned at the beginning, our strand is session 3 within the family partnership strand, partnering with families to support the needs of students at tier 3. If you didn't have the opportunity to participate in the 2 other sessions today in the family partnership strand, those sessions are recorded. There are files and polls and chats that are documented. So you can just find your way into each of those sessions within Pathable to make sure that you don't miss out on any of that important family partnership content. And with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters, Dr. Mark Wiest.
Thank you, Andy. It's my privilege to be with you all, and I'm also grateful to have 2 other presenters with me, Laura Kern and Chris Haynes. Laura is on the faculty at University of South Florida and a leader in the field, also a lawyer, an advocate, and Chris is a leader in the best school mental health program in South Carolina, and part of a big study that we have that really emphasizes family leadership. So back in 2017, Andy and I and others were part of developing an ebook on family school and family engagement and PBIS. And emanating from that, we didn't want to just put out an ebook published by the PBIS Center, by the way. Didn't just want to put out an ebook and kind of leave it there. So the Family School Community Alliance was established, and Andy helps to lead that along with Devin Minch, who's currently at the University of North Carolina. And I've just been so impressed by what the Family School Community Alliance has accomplished. This is such a key priority area for us in PBIS and more broadly in the area of effective multi-tiered systems of support in schools, really elevating the role of families and youth in co-creating the educational environment. And I just wanted to put in a pitch. Andy and Devin are also leading the Tiered Fidelity and Inventory Family School Collaboration Instrument, with some background on that here. I'm not going to get into much detail. And we're currently recruiting for sites to be involved. So if you have interest in enhancing your measurement around what you're doing in your school building or district to really elevate the role of families and youth and leading the work, I would recommend that you consider joining this pilot and contacting Andy or Devin with their contact information here. Along with Andy, I'll also be kind of monitoring the chat and will help facilitate discussion. But our 2 primary presenters today are Laura and Chris. So we'll first hear from Laura and then Chris, and then have some time at the end for discussion. You can just see some of the other things that we've been working on. We know that this issue of family and youth leadership is critical, but also there's this interface that we see with the current environment, the very challenging environment that we're in related to COVID-19 and other societal stressors. So there's some information on how to get in touch with us. And at this point, I will turn it over to Laura.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at the end of a very busy conference day, and we really appreciate it. I have to say that this one is a tough one for me, and I've been presenting across different conferences in virtual settings and in person for a while, but this is one of the first times that I've been asked to really dig deep into some of the experiences we've had with my son, who was diagnosed with autism at age 3 and then ADHD shortly thereafter. And as he headed into middle school, we started to see some anxiety. And we've had some real challenges along the way at each step of that journey that really are related to tier 3 individualized services. So we thought that perhaps we would give a little perspective. I also dug a little bit into the research of other parents' perspectives to try to sprinkle that in, so it's not just our story. But we hope that this will kind of help you think about the real needs of individualized interventions at that tier 3 level that really does cross over into some of the special education. So I wanted to share this and as I'm doing this, we do have a poll that you can start taking, and it's kind of has to do with family engagement and what practices are you currently doing. So if you can take that poll and we'll share kind of the results of that in a few slides, that would be great. But in general, when we think about tier 3 for students, this is directly out of a product for the PBIS Center that I co-authored with Don Kincaid on tier 3 services and for the student level. And I wanted to give you an idea of what that typical, what we have, like kind of our baseline of what tier 3 is. It's that support for students who are not responding to tier 1 and 2 and would benefit from intensive strategies matched to their needs. It could include disruptive behaviors, aggression, those externalizing, the ones we can see. And it can also be the internalizing, that mental health, depression, anxiety, even suicidal ideation. It can be impacted by trauma, crisis, mental health needs. And it can be helpful for any student, no matter the disability, who needs support. I wanted to add that level because this is we needed to put some kind of pyramid in, right? Of all, some, and few. And that few is that more intensive tier 3 supports. But you'll notice that disability is not, special education is not to the side. It's not, tier 3 is special education. Because when we think of our students, we're thinking of students as being all students. Those students can be students with disabilities. So for example, a student with disability should have access to the universal tier 1 practices. They should have access to tier 2 and tier 3, and sometimes they need even more for special education. In terms of my son, actually, he doesn't play basketball, but he is in many environments where he would have that classroom management, that universal tier 1, he'd get access to that. He has some areas that are not in special education, but he needs a little bit extra. And he does get some tier 2 that are not, again, special ed. And then for the individualized, some of it is special education and some of it is just more one-on-one. He needs a little bit of extra help that doesn't qualify for special education, but still would be tier 3. So just think about that. We're not talking about tier 3 is special ed, but kids with disabilities can be all the way through these tiers. The other thing to think about is how do we typically engage with families and communities at tier 3? And again, this is from that booklet that we're coming out with soon from the center. The student can help decide what works best for them, and then the family can help with decisions and provide greater insight. For example, what behaviors are occurring at home? We might have community agencies or medical providers such as doctors, mental health providers, et cetera, that help develop a comprehensive plan, and it can range from a brief consultation with a teacher and an internal consultant to wrap around with outside providers. Now, again, I want you to think about this is kind of our baseline, what tier 3 looks like and how we're working with families, right? And I want you to think as we go through this presentation and you hear about some of the needs that we had, how do we match the needs of the parents with some of these tier 3 practices? Is this enough, or do we need to think about a more comprehensive way of looking at our tier 3 services? I wanted to highlight the dual capacity building framework. And at this point, Andy, could you take a look and see in the poll if we have any idea of what participants have said about family engagement?
Yes, it looks like there's some nice strategies that are being identified in terms of ways to engage families. So some topics such as sending emails or making phone calls, using data to help engage families, holding meetings, reminder calls. IEPs were mentioned as one approach to engage families, having gatherings, or perhaps even sending out a questionnaire that might better understand family needs, preferences, and ideas.
Thank you so much for sharing, and thanks for everybody for sharing. And if you have ideas as you go through, feel free to keep adding those ideas in and share them with us. But I also wanted to take just a moment and think about that, because a lot of those were really awesome key practices. But when we think about our family school partnerships, Are all of those two-way streets? Do they think about the role that the families play together? Do they think about the conditions, what's happening with the family, what's happening with schools? Does it really dig deep into creating authentic partnerships? This dual capacity building for family partnership is education department has come up with it. If you Google it, you can find a little bit more, and they have more resources. All I want you to take away from that is think about a lot of the things we do are practices, but are they really engaging with partnership with families? Nope. So we have this kind of assumption that we have our ducks in a row, that we have our practices, that we're doing PBIS well, and that naturally we're gonna set up the stage for good family relationships. But in reality, a lot of times we're going on empty, right? Families are exhausted, especially with COVID. That research that Andy was doing on impacts of COVID on families, there's impacts on school. We're kind of exhausted, and we're trying to push at our empty to try to get to where we need to go. And we also think about, we kind of hand off that responsibility when the bell rings. So I've heard it from two angles. I've heard it from schools that you know, what happens at home stays at home, that we don't necessarily have to worry about that connection. But then we also think about from the families. I've heard from some families that kids going to school, phew, I don't have to deal with some of this anymore. The school's going to handle it. And what we're missing is that it's not just a handoff one way or the other. A little bit more has to be done in order to really support that idea of partnership. We also forget about this idea of like, I like the idea of kind of having this strength-based idea of what can we build? So we know that there are challenges, and I'll be talking about those challenges, but what if we focused on Tier 3 as a way to build resiliency for families? So what's resiliency? This is just one definition, but it's that ability to cope in adverse circumstances. Sometimes I joke with my husband that I'm like, I just need to get my resiliency back. Like I'm feeling really struggling, but like I know I'll bounce back. And I kind of think of that as how can I do that? And one way that we look at resiliency includes the characteristics that you're flexible, you have hope, you find emotional strength, you have optimism, that families have skills and practices, that they can problem solve, they can manage finances, establish routines, and that they have access and use of resources, which could be social, formal, and informal. All of these things kind of build that resiliency in families. And as you look at those things, think about your current Tier 3 systems, and are we losing opportunities to build opportunities for resiliency, to build that resiliency in families? Another study looked at interviews of families on resiliency, and they found that more resilient families balance the needs of all members of the family, including maintaining existing routines and activities, which, think about PBIS, we are really good at building routines and activities in our schools. Can we share some of that insight with our families? That they have strong social support from families, communities, close friends. They have the ability to navigate the support and systems, a health specialist, a therapist. And let me tell you, sometimes I feel like a case manager. Less resilient families, the life revolves around the child with the disabilities. They have a lack of access to supports and services, social isolation, and financial strain. And it was interesting because when I kind of put together, what are some of the things I want to share that are a little personal about our journey? These are some of the themes that I had listed. And then when I looked at the research, it looked like, wow, these are some of the things that strain the ability to be resilient. And how do we think about that? And how did we overcome that as a parent? But how can schools help support so we don't have to do that alone? So I just wanted to share Ryan. I have asked him if it was okay to share some pictures, and he said, sure, just please don't share any of me being a naked baby. And I said, I don't have any pictures of you as a naked baby, and I certainly would not be sharing them. But here's Ryan. This is right when he was diagnosed, and through the years. And I'm going to scatter a couple pictures of Ryan. As I mentioned before, he is in special education. He is fully included. He started in preschool under developmental disability, got the diagnosis of autism, ADHD, and now anxiety. And each of those have added different layers of individualized interventions needed. The first thing I wanted just to mention, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware of it, especially if you've dealt with, it doesn't even need to be pre-K, but that beginning when you hear about the diagnosis of the disability, right? And you hear that your child, and even if it's like tier 3, just typical, your child is not succeeding as much as you'd like them to. You'd like them to be kind of like, you know, the future president of the United States. But in reality, each child is different, and you've just been told that your child is going to have a couple challenges along the way, and how do you parent that? So I just want to share this. The diagnosis of ASD is unique, that we're told the earlier we do something, the more aggressively we do something, the better the outcome. But we don't know exactly what that is. And you start at the overwhelm stage. I have absolutely no idea where to begin. I can't even believe this. So in our experience, we went in and got our diagnosis and had no idea it was autism. We were totally floored. We weren't prepared for it. And the first thing I did was I drove to a bookstore and got books, because I'm a nerd. I need to educate myself. And the first thing I opened when I did that was, there was a graph, and it was an amount of institutionalization. And I thought, oh my gosh, not only do I have autism, I have institutionalization. I need to get services in place for this kid immediately. And I had no idea what I was doing. The school was really helpful at helping provide those resources. But even that, I felt like I have to do everything. And we tried everything. Evidence-based, non-evidence-based, we were just throwing it at our kid. And that is where we started in special ed. And I don't think my experience is totally atypical. I think that a lot of parents have that kind of like crash burn. We now have to do something. And that, I don't think that always goes away for parents, that they feel that they need to do something and it has to happen now because they only have a certain amount of time. There's isolation and stigma. And again, these are all these things that make it really hard to have that resiliency. It's hard to talk to other parents and family members and share this information. You don't want your kid to be isolated. What if you're not invited to the parties? And that was happening more and more. It's difficult to know what to do about a child's behavior. You don't know, you just don't have that information. I mean, I went and got a PhD. Most people don't go and get a PhD to know how to parent a child, but what kind of resources can we as educators help to provide parents so they don't feel that isolated? We're disconnected from systems, and they found that with other parents, that we started to have more agency in institutions instead of being connected with school. We got disconnected from friends, family, and parent groups and other sources of support. And again, I have citations because this is from other parents, not just our experience. And then there was also the stigma of being a parent of a child with a disability, which was a little tough to try to figure out how to navigate. And we're still dealing with that now as we're thinking about the college years. And the conversations we're having are really different than the conversations of a lot of my friends who are, deciding what type of college. I'm just trying to think, I think we're going to college, but it's going to look really different from us. And I'm kind of embarrassed a little bit about that, even though I shouldn't be. It is difficult. There was an interview with a family member that other families were just about their only sources of support. And I do have to say that we were very fortunate that in the beginning, in elementary, we found a really strong parent group that we could talk to and shared local resources. And that was really helpful. And again, as we think about the applied of this, that maybe this is something that in our tier 3 services we can do to try to have parents be able to connect with each other to share some of those resources among themselves. Lack of communication. So there were often separate systems of interventions going on between home and school. And we were very active. Not every parent is as active as we are, believe me. We were really scrambling. But we didn't communicate between the systems. And I do have to say that as I was listening to the wonderful tier 2 last session, it was incredible. My son came in, and luckily it was on, you guys all have us on mute, thank goodness, but he was all excited because he found out that he doesn't have to take as many notes for a class. And his special ed teacher said he was fine and he could stop doing that. And I have to tell you, that was so frustrating because we had set up a system. He's doing really, really, really well in history. Other areas, not so much, but again, history is as strong. And they put him in an AP history, which I would never have done because it's really difficult. It's spiking anxiety. It's creating all sorts of family pressure. And I set up a system where I'm reading to him, and we've got a dictation system. He's dictating his notes. He's doing fabulous in the class. He's got an A. But the amount of effort that it's taking me at home in order for him to succeed at school is incredible. He just came home and said, my teacher said I'm doing too much work. I can stop doing that. And I'm going, oh my gosh. I don't know if she knows what I'm doing at home. I think I sent her an email, but I don't know. So now after we have this session, I have to go and communicate with her and say, look, we need to talk about that. And we need to say, yes, maybe his anxiety is spiking, maybe we have to pull back, but we need to talk as a team. I need to share what I'm doing. You need to share what you're doing. But now I have a kid who thinks that he doesn't have to do the work for a class that he's going to struggle in if he doesn't have that support. There's a mismatch between providers often. And again, think about these as barriers to resiliency. Even with communication, different professionals use different names, different approaches, different assessments, and different languages. Sometimes we might be working on the same thing, but not working together. And it's often tough as a parent to navigate between those systems. And I didn't always have a PhD. I started out like just many, many years just trying to manage between OT and PT at home and OT and PT at school. And for example, he has some sensory issues. So he really needs sensory stimulation. And we had some really good occupational therapy working on that. But we also had a BCBA at school. And so when I'd be talking about sensory and what we're doing for sensory in the OT level, that would confuse the BCBA who would be talking about it as a function. All of this stuff is just to say that it's really tough for a parent to be able to navigate all of this stuff with the terms and with the alphabet soup. We also had a fear of loss of services. So what if we were throwing all of this stuff and doing all this stuff at home? We're afraid to kind of tell the school, because what if they decide that we're doing so much, we don't have to do anything at school? Or what if they take away the services they have? We actually did have a situation when he was going from middle school to high school where they said he's doing so well. He still has autism, but it's not impacting his education. So we're going to exit him from special education, and then he'll go in high school and he'll be fully included, no problem, no special ed. And I was like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this, especially during the transition? And I had a frank conversation with a special ed teacher at the time. And I love my special ed programs in school. We've been really blessed. So I don't want to knock our special educators. But again, it was that lack of communication. And I said, well, we're doing all of these things. And we have, at the time, I think we had music therapy, and we had a developmental pediatrician, and then we had social skills group therapy. We had all this stuff going on. So they didn't have to do it at school. They didn't have to pull them out. But what they didn't realize was that we were supplementing what was going on. And when they wanted to drop him from school, they ended up having to bring in a separate psychologist, do an independent evaluation, and they ended up giving us more services because they didn't realize how much we were doing. He didn't get dropped from services. He's still in special ed, and it looks like he's up for reevaluation. It looks like he will graduate with special education services. But that was a big fear, that we're going to lose these resources that we have thought to put into place. We keep on growing. So I wanted to bring you back to my son. He's, thriving as the parents are scrambling and doing this. And in fact, when I told him like some of the stuff I was going to share, because I really wanted to kind of get permission now that he's heading into the older years, he was saying, that's okay, Mom, you can share. And he gave me a hug and said, I'm sorry it was so tough for you back, when I was really little. It's not, no problem now, because I'm perfect now, but I'm sorry, Mom. And I was like, gosh, that empathy and that hug really meant a lot to me, that he was able to acknowledge that and say, I love you. Availability of outside providers and resources. So some of the things was that the quantity and quality, they mentioned this in the research. So even if you can get the resources, and in a lot of communities you can't, the quality differs. So for us, in order to get really strong quality, I have to drive halfway across the state. And I did that a lot throughout his beginning years. We don't really have to do it as much now because we really don't have as much services now as we did then, but it wasn't available in our community. And if it's available, it's difficult to access. I had a car, I was able to get there. A lot of parents can't get there. There's lack of public transportation. And it just puts a lot of stress on that, because that lack of resources is something that drives down that resiliency. Limited hours, a lot of times you'd have to take time off work to do this, and not all parents can do that. And then he wouldn't be accepted in certain things. So if I tried to do like a regular soccer, he couldn't really do it. So we ended up having to have like a specialized soccer or a specialized private lessons for swim, because he couldn't do the group lessons. So it just brings a lot of stress. And I think, again, about bringing it back to education, what can we do to have services and have some of this stuff in schools, that we can have sports that our kids can participate in that are in the school, that we can have that eliminate the transportation problem, because they're not going to have to go out and find it. It is within the school and it's embedded within our services that we're already providing. Costs, total costs. We were very, very fortunate. Both my husband and I were able to continue working, and we had good insurance. But I have talked to some families. One family I worked with was really thought, and again, no judgment on this family, but she really thought that if her son was gluten-free, that would help with the autism. But she couldn't afford to do gluten-free. So she was doing gluten-free, off gluten, on gluten, off gluten, on gluten. And that was such a stress to her, because she felt like she kept creating that autism because she didn't have the money to provide what she thought was necessary for her kid. Impact on employment and finances. Can you keep a job? In the beginning years, can you get daycare? I was very, very fortunate. I was able to use family friends and have them help provide the care, because I don't think he would have been able to stay in daycare system. And then insurance. Do you have insurance? Is it enough insurance? Will they cover insurance? A lot of times, some of the really good people that we're driving for only take private pay, and we sucked it up and paid for it, which again, not everybody can do, and it shouldn't be something that you have to do. If we're thinking about education, how can we equalize the playing field and support our parents by having access to some of this stuff within our schools, so they don't have to worry about the costs and trying to find it? And as we start wrapping up, the layers of reality. For some parents, and a lot of them, they're kind of like the soccer moms, right? They're driving their kids around to all different things, and they might have many siblings. And instead of a soccer mom, I think sometimes parents with disability feel like they're kind of a therapy mom. And I only have one, I don't have many siblings, but I like this quote. It's 150% of my life, every minute, every hour, every day. Even when I'm sleeping, I'm dreaming about ASD, so autism. And it just hits home that, again, what's hitting against our ability to be resilient is the fact that this disability has become all encompassing, because we are just trying to get the services he needs at school, at home, all across, all over the place. Getting back to the positives, to kind of wrap it up a little bit, I am happy to have a child with unique strengths, as many other parents were. And I've become more sensitive to others around me, and tried to be more inclusive and invite people, and not be judgy, because we just don't know. We need to accept people who they are. And then finally, this is a quote, but I think this could be something I could say. There's no greater love than what I have for my son. I absolutely adore him. I would do it all over again in any time. I probably would pull back on the amount of services we were doing in the very beginning, just because we didn't know what we were doing. But I really think that we probably have overcome a lot of these things to become resilient, but we did that on our own, and that was not fair to us. It wasn't fair to my son. And it's something that, as a special educator, there's something not quite right with our system, that it's on the parents to do this, or to feel guilt, or to just be so frustrated. There's got to be more that we can do in our school systems to meet the individual needs of kids. That, again, it's not just special ed, but kids who require those individualized interventions. Perhaps we consider practices, better ways to communicate, which I remember a bunch of you had mentioned some really great communication things in the beginning. And I would say do that even more. And if you haven't had a chance to go to that tier 2 session that just happened before, check it out. They're doing a really great job in schools. We're having that positive communication, having that back and forth communication between schools and homes so that they know what's going on between both things. There's a study for parents of kids with emotional and behavior disorders that the school wanted to hear their opinions, included them in planning, wanted to talk with them, shared information regularly, and engaged in proactive communication was really what they really satisfied them. They reported greater satisfaction with the method and tone of communication at schools, where they felt informed about their child's progress and included in the planning and decision making. You know, and I actually added this slide because the other thing that I want to stress is that when we talk about our practices, we also should think about those on a continuum for families, that maybe we're talking across our tier 1 about the prevalence of trauma, that we have our interest inventories, we have our strength-based phone calls, community-focused events, we ask people to come in, and then maybe we need to up it a little bit for these parents that are struggling a little bit more. Maybe we have listening sessions, we provide transportation, we push out. And then maybe for our families that are really struggling, that we have maybe some home visits or invitations, or we do something to meet the needs because they are struggling to find that resiliency, even though they love their kids and really want the best for their kids. It's really tough to be balancing everything and to be positive and to have that resources and skills and strengths and everything that we need to have really strong, resilient, strength-based parenting. The other thing I would just want to mention, our practice is enough. So how can we work together across our systems, relying on data and using our best practices? So a lot of times we think about practices and we have that list of really great things that we're doing, but can we sustain those? Are those just, we have great engagement practices. How are we sustaining that across the schools? And that's why I'm really excited to turn it over to Chris to have a little bit more insight of what he's been able to do at schools, and bring some of this stuff into the school, so it's not just the families trying to do it on their own. As we transition over to Chris, there is one more poll to take, and it's when you think about your family engagement practices, is it more likely to be at tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3? So if you have a chance to kind of take that poll, and then we'll share the results in a minute, that would be really great. Chris, do you want me to stop share and then you could bring your slides up, or do you want me to keep forwarding?
If you continue, that's super helpful to me.
Okay.
All right, I think the formatting on this one got a little messed up, but this is just an intro slide to tell you who I am and what we do. My name is Chris Haynes, so I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I'm the director of school mental health programs at Greater Greenville Mental Health Center. So I wanted to tell you a little about what we do and how we try to meet the needs of kids, especially at that tier 3 level when they need some treatment in the school setting. So Greater Greenville Mental Health Center, where I work, is part of the South Carolina Department of Mental Health. Every state has a Department of Mental Health. Some states call it something different. And in lots of states, that department functions kind of like a broker for services. They contract out to inpatient, outpatient, private, nonprofit folks who do mental health work across their state and across their system. South Carolina has a good thing going because our Department of Mental Health functions differently. Instead, we are direct treatment providers. So here's a little map of South Carolina, how this works for community mental health services. There are 16 centers across our state, and each center serves a county or a group of counties. Greenville, where I'm from, is at the top left there, the sort of tan-looking long county. Greenville County is the most populous county in our state by far. Some people wouldn't know that. You might think Charleston or a place you've heard of, but Greenville is a big place with a big school district. So one school district serves that whole county, and one mental health center from our Department of Mental Health serves that whole county, just to give you context. So our district is the 45th largest in the country, 76,000 students or so. And something that's really important to both our district and our Department of Mental Health, including my mental health center, is school mental health programs. That's where we station therapists at schools. School mental health programs function best when a therapist is stationed at a school full-time or at minimum half-time, and they're integrated well into the team of that school. So we are the community mental health provider, but we're integrated into schools. That practice started in South Carolina in 1993, which is a really long time ago. Most places haven't done school mental health quite so long. So at a middle school here in our county, and it's grown over time. So that over the last couple of years, this team has grown to be 85 therapists that serve 105 schools and programs here in Greenville County. We serve every public school in our public school district and a couple of charter schools as well. And that's pretty unique. To have school mental health in every school on that kind of scale has taken a long time. This is my 14th school year, and we've been working on this. We're really proud of our partnership with Greenville County Schools, and we're really proud of our work with our mental health center here. So as we've done this work for a long time, and as our team has grown, we've gotten good at doing several things. One is making sure that kids get access to services. Laura mentioned some of the barriers. I usually boil them down to transportation, motivation, resources like time off work, these things that keep kids from being able to access help that they need. When a therapist is there full time, they can get the services on site at school. But as you were mentioning, Laura, it's not just practices. It wouldn't be so helpful if your son even came to my office on site at the school and I didn't communicate with you as the parent, or I didn't communicate with the school as the educator. So school mental health programs function best when there is a more family, school, community mental health partnership. And as we've been working on doing that better and better over years, we have gotten to be in a great project with Mark Wiest, who's here with us, called Partnering for Student Wellness. So we've had lots of ideas about ways that we could engage schools and engage families better. So we have a project, and we're practicing some stuff that we already know from our experience is probably going to be pretty good. We're looking at some ways that we're doing school mental health here in Greenville and at another location in Baltimore. And we're implementing some stuff with some of our schools where there is a team who meets regularly that includes the community mental health therapist who's stationed at the school, and teachers who are involved in Tier 1 activities and Tier 2 activities like social emotional learning, and families. Having a parent who participates in regular meetings with the school and the mental health provider, driving the mental health program forward, not just the Tier 3 provider, but also the Tier 1 and Tier 2 folks. The teams, as I said, include here in this project, 3 teachers who are specifically teaching mental health literacy, and a school family leader and a school mental health therapist like myself. What's often missing when we're doing school mental health work is a parent, a family member, somebody who's actually connected to a child like Laura. It's really pretty easy for us here now to partner as a therapist at a school with my school. It takes an extra step to make sure that I'm involving a parent or a family member in treatment. In this project, we're actually using a family member, a caregiver, a student who has Tier 3 mental health services, not just communicating about their child, but communicating about the programming overall. Here's what we want to do at Tier 1. Here's what we have at Tier 2. Here's how Tier 3 things are going. How can we reduce stigma? How could we make things better? How would you like things communicated with you? These are conversations with a family leader. Not all the families are in this meeting, but at least there's some representation of a family at the table at the time that we're planning what we need to do. And giving a voice to caregivers helps them give us perspective we might not have. Like Laura would be able to say, gosh, we have to do something about this communication between the teachers and me. I love working with you guys, but you didn't know it was going to be really stressful for the teacher to directly tell the kid about this academic thing. Parents need to be in on that. Having a parent at the table helps the school and the provider go, oh, I didn't even think about that. We see a blind spot better when parents can speak to what we need to know. So that's what our teams look like. And in this project, we're doing services also directly with kids, just like we always do. Those services on site at school include individual therapy, family therapy, group therapy. We can do assessments and crisis interventions. And we're using patient-centered practices and evidence-based practices in our treatment at the tier 2 and 3 levels. To tell you a little more about what we're doing at the tier 1 level in this project, we're looking at teaching things about mental health literacy that often is missing from social and emotional learning. The curriculums don't necessarily help kids understand something like what's mental health or what's mental illness or what's stigma and what am I going to deal with in my life with anxiety or depression, or what will I encounter other people who deal with, like autism or ADHD? What if I have one of those things and I needed to get help? Where would I go? Who would I talk to? What would help look like when I got there? What if I loved somebody who was dealing with one of those things or was friends with them? What would I do and how would I support them? What are the things I can do to maintain positive mental health? That stuff is specific, or those things are specific skills that we want to teach kids. So we've started piloting that and getting parents to give us voice in the way that we would do that, and getting educators voice in the way we need to implement that in the school, and having therapists who are a resource for when clearly tier 1 is not enough. Some kids need more support than that, like tier 3 treatment with us. I think I've already hit on the main points here in this slide, and sorry for jumping ahead in my own content, but it's super important for caregivers to partner at all tiers. So I wanted to share some engagement strategies with you that we've seen, but we've been particularly focused with our school family leaders in this project on reducing stigma. Stigma is a thing that keeps people, families, and kids out of treatment when they really need it. And sometimes the best person to reduce stigma for you is a peer, somebody who's gone through the same thing, experienced the same thing. It's one thing for the mental health therapist at the school to say it, another thing for the school to say it. But what if then I just need somebody outside the system to talk to me, to tell me what's going on? So these family leaders have been working with us on how do we reduce stigma for kids and for families at the school level around mental health literacy and mental health treatment. One of the things that's been really cool to see is they've developed strategies. Some are displayed here. So I'm not sharing something from one of our middle schools in this study, but I'm showing you something from a high school that's similar. They've created a website through the Parent Teacher Student Association that's dedicated specifically to mental health. It gives them facts. It tells them where they can learn more and provides resources. It links them to crisis lines. It tells them who the professionals are at their school. It gives a page for my therapist. It gives a page for the teacher who's doing social emotional learning. It gives a page for this parent liaison that somebody could contact. And it gives them links to online resources that they could access right away if they needed some tools. Now, this is no panacea, but it does a great job of putting resources and information right in a place that's not stigmatized. This is the same website I go to get my students' calendar, the same place I go when I need to get a document. Here's the link to the mental health page. Mental health stuff must be really common. It's right on the home page that I can link to, click, and here's who I could contact. So something really interesting happened with that website. I'll give you just an anecdotal story. This website we actually had shared. If you'll just go back one slide, because I'll give another story with the ones with the picture. But this website, we wound up sort of sharing models of district-wide here during September for suicide awareness. The parent that you see is a family leader here and a parent advocate with us who works a lot on the issue of suicide because her son died by suicide when he was in high school. So her doing this work is incredibly powerful and personal. And because this website was up, a middle schooler on the entire other side of the county emailed her to say, what would I do if I needed help? Because I was thinking about suicide, or one of my friends was. And that helped this student get linked to resources right away. It turned out to not be a crisis. It turned out to be a question on how do I support somebody else. But the student at the middle school felt more comfortable reaching out to somebody that wasn't the system, who was just a mom and maybe could answer her question. And we might have saved a life with the friend of this person by helping her know what to do and get linked to resources. And now we can do the next slide. Another sort of sad anecdote here. You can see again, this is the same mother. This is at the middle school where we're doing one of our projects. And sadly, last month, a student did die by suicide at the school. And that led to an opportunity with the team, the teachers, my therapist, who you see on the right, the parent who you see on the left, to figure out what can we do to address mental health needs of this school in the moment of this crisis. There wasn't time to plan anything elaborate because they needed to do something quick. It was a crisis situation with an immediate grief need. And they used the strategy of just creating a positive post-it note bulletin board. You see the bulletin board in the picture. They had a table set up where they were engaging with kids face-to-face, helping kids write words of encouragement to themselves and others, and post those on a bulletin board. And that gave them time to interact with kids who maybe we knew needed to get linked to more help, and time to see which kids were able to, who seemed okay, were able to offer encouragement to others. And it engaged the school just as a whole in an effort to do something to heal with this acute sort of mental health crisis, dealing with the loss of this friend. So that's just some examples of how it played out here in Greenville. I could talk a long time too about many of Laura's experiences. I stay working with a school that is a special ed, self-contained separate school for middle and high schoolers with emotional and behavioral disorders, autism to schizophrenia, and lots of complex trauma. And I can tell you that both for special education and for general education, the need to partner with mental health and partner with parents is real, and the effects are pretty awesome. Thanks for letting me share those couple stories and about what we do here.
So thanks very much, Laura and Chris. Grateful to be in this presentation with you guys, three national leaders. Also, thank you to Diane Lemaster for being our tech support. Really appreciate that. Andy's helping manage the chat. I have some questions I can bring up to promote some conversation. But I'll start with Andy. Are there comments or questions that we're seeing in the chat at this point?
Feel free, everyone, to add your questions in the chat if you'd like to ask anything of our presenters today. At this point, a lot of gratitude to you, Laura, and to you, Chris, for sharing your experiences and your work.
So I'll open, and also thank you, Andy, for the research on the interface with the pandemic plus, right? Because it's the pandemic and a lot of other things happening in our society right now. They're very, very stressful, and many of us are struggling. And one of the things that I see is just, first of all, everybody being very stressed, schools being very stressed, teachers, administrators. And we're seeing in many communities sort of a retreat to the essential. We've begun to make, I think, significant progress in this area of family and youth leadership in PBIS and mental health in schools. But it seems to be a threat, this retreat to the essential. So I just wanted to throw that out to the three of you for any thoughts that you might have around that and anything we can do about it, as folks are just very stressed contending with our current societal context.
I think it's, as a parent, and then I think it's that we have to give ourselves permission to do something that would help ourselves too, that whether it's exercise or watch a movie, or sometimes you're just too tired and you need to stop work at 4:45. I mean, it just, to be able to acknowledge that stress is here and we are in a heightened stress, and to be able to take care of ourselves so we can take care of our families is something that I struggle with, because I'm likely to work till 7 and then be like, how am I going to get dinner together? But I think it's permission to breathe and to be okay that we're stressed is one thing that I would say, that to acknowledge it.
Chris, Andy, I have some additional thoughts.
Well, I guess if I just gave you my immediate reaction to your statements, the retreat to the essential that I'm observing, not specific to Greenville, but in many states and counties and school districts here, the retreat to the essential, like just get the academics done, that's all we got time to do kind of thing, is happening at district levels. At classroom and school levels, the concern for school mental health has never been more real. They would love more support. They really want more resources. The amount of referrals we're getting at middle and high school levels in particular is overwhelming. The need for help is real and people are reaching out to it. But because districts have been so taxed by COVID and contact tracing and technology and all of the things, they're fatigued. And now it's difficult to feel like, okay, and now we need to deal with the tsunami of mental health needs that are in front of us. How do we fund it? How do we staff it? We're already exhausted. I certainly understand it. But the challenge seems to be helping district and state and other leaders understand that by sticking our heads in the sand on the mental health crisis, we're only going to make the issue worse. It will be less work now and less fatiguing if we do it now than if we procrastinate it or stick our heads in the sand and pretend like there's nothing going on. That's going to exacerbate the issue and it's going to be harder to solve later.
Yes, I agree. So 2 points there, Chris. So the SEBA framework is prominent in schools: social, emotional, behavioral, academic. And we, even before the pandemic plus, we know about the academic slide, right? So from May to late August, students lose gains, and there's a tendency for school administrators to focus on academics. We've had an unprecedented academic slide. And we do see some school administrators just kind of zoned into what to do about that. But really, the reality is what you're saying is that we need balance in that framework. Of course, we need to make progress to address the academic slide. But where people are is in the social, emotional, behavioral, mental health space. And we have to be with people in that space. And I think we're hearing from the families, and they're helping to guide the administrators and the teachers and the school mental health professionals. That's where we are. That's the support that we need right now. Andy, would you have any comments at this point?
Certainly would echo comments that others have made, and certainly those resonate with me as well. I think, building off of those comments, a couple things that are, coming up for me as I'm thinking through this and listening to you all talk is the importance of of remembering strengths, that we have as educators, and strengths that families have. And sometimes I think the best gift that we can give someone during, these challenging times is to remind them of their strengths, remind them of their capacity, and support them in, really focusing on those strengths and using those strengths as a primary avenue to help them sort of, create the vision, and see that vision through, to a reality. So I think, really centering on strengths, and then and remembering those strengths. And then the other piece is the importance of relationships. I think our and others' work in the area of family school partnerships just, suggests the importance of relationships, of deep, authentic connections among each other and among ourselves, and using those relationships with families and with educators as a way to support youth and support positive connections across home and school.
That's excellent. And I know, Laura, that you also brought up the construct of resilience, and the PBIS Center, and I'm fortunate to be one of the partners. We're engaged in some broad national discussions on what the country needs right now. And one of those discussions is we need an emphasis on mental health literacy, as Chris was presenting, because we know there are therapeutic benefits to learning about mental health, as well as it reduces stigma and promotes help seeking. We also need to focus on wellness for all of us, self-care. That was in your example, Laura, and resilience. And the resilience literature has so much to offer for us. And much of that literature is being resurrected as we're all forced to be resilient now in the context that we're in. And some jurisdictions are doing a lot with that. I know there's a lot happening in Canada around really resurrecting that resilience literature. So there's a discussion on mental health literacy, wellness, and resilience for all, right? So the three primary groups would be students, families, and staff. Mm-hmm. That's a new paradigm in a way, so that we're not just targeting all of the work toward helping the students, but helping all of us, right? So just wanted to throw that out and see if you had thoughts on how do we move in a direction of developing programming, reflecting those realms, but also focused on those three groups: students, families, and staff. What are your thoughts on that? Laura?
Yeah, I was thinking again about that, the importance and importance of communication, that if I don't, in the session 2, when they were talking about tier 2 communications, for those that you didn't have a chance to do that, Kathleen Strickland Cohen was talking about this form that they used to be able to have a conversation about what was going on in the school and what was going on at home. And just to have that communication and that conversation, I think is sometimes very helpful, because I don't know the stresses that my special education teacher is under. I'm sure she's got tons of kids. She's dealing with COVID. She has all of those things. And if I got frustrated with her and sent that email right when I was angry, it would be a completely different situation than if I calm down, I take a step back, and then say, hey, we need to meet, we need to talk. I need to find out why you would want him to stop doing what we're doing at home, but I want to know what you guys are doing at home and how can we work together to better support my kid, because meanwhile his anxiety is spiking. So I think that again, that communication, but two-way, not just here's a newsletter, here's information, but let's actually have a conversation about it so we can plan together what's best for the student.
I think you highlight a certain catch-22, right? Amidst all the stress that we're under, the tendency is for us to retreat to our own domain, which means we're not going to have the opportunity to be communicating to others, to be interacting, to be supported, to vent. But if we could get into that space, right? Imagine meetings with staff and students and families where we're talking about each of those things. We're, a session on resilience, a session on wellness, a session on mental health, or multiple sessions, finding the time to overcome, the stress and this tendency to just stay in my box and do the essential, to get in a zone that might be really therapeutic for all of those groups. Other thoughts? Any other comments in our chat, Andy?
Andy, did
There
you
is one.
have a
Oh,
chance
please.
to look at the poll? I was curious about if anybody had had a chance to look at that poll on the engagement at what level.
Yes, we do have some results for that poll. So looking at that, it looks like about 45% of individuals who responded said that when there is family engagement present and students who have access, it's considered about across all the tiers. So 45% across all the tiers, around 40% at tier 3, 5% at tier 2, and 10% at tier 1. I'm noticing a couple.
Worrying that we really need to ramp up family and youth leadership of the full MTSS, right? Not just tier 3.
Yeah, and it makes me think, because I would have assumed that it was tier 1 that those practices are in place. So that's interesting that the tier 3, that individual might be getting more support. And it might be that we need to take a look at what we're doing across all tiers for family engagement and to bump it up, especially as we're in that situation where we're starting to pull back a little bit.
I am seeing some questions coming into the chat now. So one question is around what mental health literacy curriculum you're using.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that and Chris can elaborate. So as mentioned, Canada has provided a lot of leadership in this, that we're using a program called The Guide. It's out of Dalhousie University, Stan Kuchar, Ethan Way, Andrew Baxter, leaders in the work. You could go on a website called teenmentalhealth.org. The guide was originally developed for high school students and adapted for middle, and we're using it in this study. And now there's work underway to adapt it also for elementary. There's also a really excellent program more for elementary called ClassroomWise, developed by the National Center for School Mental Health and the Mental Health Transfer and Technology Center funded by SAMHSA. So that's another program that's out there. And this area is beginning to proliferate. So I think we're going to be seeing more and more mental health literacy programs out there, and modular strategies, not just, you have to get a full program and manuals. Part of the reason I think for the increased interest, it's maybe one of the silver linings in the context that we're living in, is that people are being more and more transparent about their own struggles. And leaders are stepping forward and talking about their mental health issues. And we are seeing reduced stigma and more interest, dramatically more interest in this work.
Yeah, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, Mark, but there's sort of 2 levels of mental health literacy: what you're going to teach your staff, what you're going to do with kids. So ClassroomWise is a faculty staff sort of facing thing. It's an online, great course for helping sort of establish that workforce mental health literacy that we would need before we taught kids. And then curriculums like the guide we're using in this project are, what do you teach the kids, like directly after the adults have learned and sort of gone through ClassroomWise, which is like mental health literacy focused for schools. Then what do we teach kids? And there's different curriculums that you could use, but this teenmentalhealth.org one is accessible. They put it online. It's there for you. You can go check it out.
Are there other questions or comments, Andy?
One question here is about whether you have any insights on how restorative practices could support tier 3 level services.
I'll let Laura and Chris take that if they're up for it.
I can respond from my work here in doing trauma-informed and restorative stuff in this county and at a special ed school. Restorative practices fits into MTSS just like anything. So restorative practices, at its core, you would need things for tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. There's things that we're doing that are restorative, like practicing mindfulness and using de-escalation and teaching communication skills and teaching responsibility, and teaching sort of norms or protocols or a PBIS matrix, how you guys like to do for how we resolve conflict, or doing specific social emotional things. Then there's going to be groups who have times that they need more than that. So maybe there's a group that experienced an event and I can bring them in and we can do a restorative circle. That's just a listening circle where I ask a question and I sort of guide it. And then there's going to be tier 3 things where there is a specific conflict between two people, physical, emotional, whatever. And now we need to apply skills to de-escalate and then resolve that and make restitution for somebody maybe who was wronged. How do we make that right? So restorative practices is just another sort of tool that should fit well into your MTSS protocol. You'd just be thinking, how do we implement that? What do we want everybody to get? And then when would we need to implement it for some or for few or for individualized things?
And the only thing I would add to that is that as you get to that tier 3 level where you're working with restorative practices, to kind of consider from like a BCBA, applied behavior analysis point of view, why the behavior is being done. Because if you have a kid that's doing aggressive behavior and they're getting a lot of attention for it, you want to be careful that restorative practices is not putting lots and lots of attention on that behavior, because that might then escalate the behavior rather than de-escalate. So that's the only caveat I'd say with restorative practices at tier 3. Just make sure that you're not increasing the behavior by drawing lots of attention to it. Or if you have a kid that's doing stuff to escape a behavior and he doesn't or she doesn't want to be involved, you are forcing that student to confront that behavior, which could again create behavior escalation. So just be aware of the function of the individualized behavior if you're working at that tier 3 level with restorative practices.
So thank you all. Can you bring up the evaluation slide? So there, we would encourage everybody to do an evaluation of the session if it's possible for you to do that. And thank you very much, Laura, Chris, Andy, and Diane, for your support of this session. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the forum. There are some discussion sessions this evening. There's a great one by Joni Splett on screening that I'd encourage you to check out. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the forum.
Thanks, everyone.